TRADCAST Express. TRADCAST Express, it's Saturday, July 12th, 2025. Guess what? This past Wednesday, July 9th, Pope Leo XIV preached a homily in which he called on people to pray for conversions. He said, quote, "We should pray for the conversion of the many people inside and outside the Church who do not yet recognize the urgent need to care for our common home." Unquote. Yes, the global warming/climate justice gospel is in need of converts because apparently not enough people are buying it. And I suspect even proselytism will be permitted to make that kind of convert. Now, of course, Leo said many other things in his homily too, such as this doozy, quote, "Only a contemplative gaze can change our relationship with creation and bring us out of the ecological crisis brought on by the breakdown of our relationship with God, with our neighbors, and with the earth that is the effect of sin." Unquote. See, a contemplative gaze alone can do it, folks. But of course, this is pure Francis speak. And throughout the last 2 months, Leo XIV, Robert Prevost, has confirmed what we suspected from the very beginning, namely that he is Francis 2.0, but with manners, with style, and with a love of beautiful vestments, Latin, and incense. However, even that can be seen as a moment of grace, actually, because it will help, to an extent, to separate the wheat from the chaff. Now we can see who among traditionalists is in it for the sake of the true faith, and who's in it mainly for the externals, the smells and bells, so to speak. Definitely beware of those who seek to downplay Leo's attacks on sound doctrine, his denials of the true faith, his promotion of unfit clergy to influential positions, etc., and instead want you to focus on his Latin chant or on the elegant shoes he's wearing, or even on that contemplative gaze of his. In other news, did you know that this past Monday, July 7th, was World Kiswahili Language Day? No, you didn't, because you don't read Vatican news. And that's actually a good thing. I do it only so you don't have to. Anyway, the title of the article they published yesterday is World Kiswahili Language Day Celebrated Globally as Symbol of Unity, Development. What does that have to do with Catholicism? Nothing, of course, and that must be why Vatican News is interested in covering it. The false social gospel of human fraternity and dignity, perfectly compatible with Freemasonry, is what the people at the post-Catholic Vatican really believe in. The salvation of souls is overrated. No, of course, there is nothing wrong with celebrating the Kiswahili language, but it is telling that it's a topic for the post-Catholic Vatican. Meanwhile, the German Diocese of Rottenburg-Stuttgart, the emphasis is definitely on rotten, as you will see momentarily, has issued a collection of prayers that can be used for blessing couples, defined simply as people who love each other, regardless of any other circumstance. You know, like whether they're already married to someone else, or whether they're two people of the same sex, or are transgender, and so on. The following text is taken from an article published on the official diocesan website. I'm using a translation provided by the Catholic Conclave blog. Quote, "With the publication of a collection of materials entitled 'We Love One Another, What a Blessing,' the Diocese of Rottenburg-Stuttgart is opening up new avenues of pastoral guidance for couples seeking a blessing for their relationship, regardless of their lifestyle or marital status. This collection is aimed at pastoral workers who accompany non-church married or divorced and remarried couples, as well as couples of all sexual orientations and gender identities on their shared journey and provide them with spiritual support during significant moments." And a little bit further down, they say, An important impetus came from Rome, With the letter Fiducia Supplicans, published in December 2023, Pope Francis paved the way for further exploring the possibility of blessings. In it, he emphasizes the pastoral significance of blessings as an expression of God's saving presence in concrete human life stories, even outside of sacramental orders. At its core is the conviction that where people encounter one another in love and responsibility, God is present, and this togetherness is worthy of blessing." Unquote. Sick. It is absolutely sick what these people are doing. It will be bad enough if they simply accepted public sins against chastity, especially those contrary to nature. If they simply said, yeah, it's a sin, but don't worry about it, God is merciful, we're all sinners. That will be bad enough. But what they do is much worse. They say that it is not sinful, that God does not condemn it, but that God blesses it and makes himself present in it. Much worse than sins against purity are sins of blasphemy, and here we have both. Woe to you that call evil good and good evil, that put darkness for light and light for darkness, that put bitter for sweet and sweet for bitter, says the prophet Isaiah in chapter 5, verse 20. But then, of course, these people don't believe in Holy Scripture anyway, at least not in those parts they disagree with. Because, hey, if only St. John the Baptist had known about that, right? If only St. John the Baptist had known that when two people love each other, nothing else matters, and God blesses that and makes himself present in the relationship. I guarantee you, with that kind of moral doctrine, St. John the Baptist would not have angered Herod the Tetrarch and could have kept his head attached to his body a lot longer. But alas, the Baptist lived before Fiducia Supplicans, and so he told Herod very rigidly, quote, "It is not lawful for thee to have thy brother's wife," unquote. That's Mark 6:18. Now, according to Fiducia Supplicans, Herod had every right to be displeased. After all, he and his mistress should have gotten a blessing from the Baptist instead of a rebuke. But no, St. John refused to recognize God's supposed presence in their loving relationship, and so he ended up paying for that with his life. Especially in Germany, the Vatican II Church is a cesspool of perversion and apostasy. What will Leo XIV do about this? Nothing, of course. Well, actually, wait a minute. Not so fast. See, he might actually issue a decree requiring that these blessing ceremonies be conducted in Latin. Next is a story from England. Historic Mass celebrated by Papal nuncio at Anglican Cathedral in rare event, writes the Catholic World Report, and goes on, quote, "For the first time in modern history, the Apostolic Nuncio to the United Kingdom has celebrated Mass in England's most celebrated Anglican Cathedral. On Monday, July 7th, which marked the feast of the translation of St. Thomas Becket, Archbishop Miguel Mori Buendia celebrated the Holy Sacrifice of the Mass at Canterbury Cathedral with hundreds in attendance, including the Vatican's cricket team," unquote. Well, I guess this is basically the Anglicans returning Novus Ordos the favor. If you recall, Pope Francis had allowed the Archlayman of Canterbury to use a Roman basilica for his invalid Eucharistic celebration in January of last year. And that is significant because Anglican ordinations are invalid even according to the official Novus Ordo doctrine. Pope Leo XIII made an infallible pronouncement on that in 1896 in the apostolic letter Apostolicae Curae, and the Vatican II Church has never attempted to rescind that, although there are certain liberals, of course, that are pushing for that. The point being, even Novus Ordos officially believe that Anglican ordinations are invalid, meaning their masses, as a consequence, are necessarily invalid. On the flip side, it is a grave sacrilege to offer the true Catholic Mass in an Anglican cathedral. even though that cathedral was originally a Catholic one that the Anglicans simply stole from us. Because that cathedral has been desecrated, profaned by the Anglican takeover. It is now the worship site of heretics. Canon 823, Section 1 of the 1917 Code of Canon Law states, quote, "It is not permitted to celebrate Mass in the temples of heretics or schismatics, even if at one time they were duly consecrated or blessed." Unquote. Now, of course, that absolute prohibition was tossed out in the Novus Ordo Code of Canon Law of 1983, but that's beside the point here. The point is that something like this is allowed in the Vatican II Church, whereas the Catholic Church strictly forbade it. This sort of thing, this sharing of churches and altars, is one of the ways in which the Vatican II Church preaches the heresy of indifferentism. The idea that it doesn't matter what religion you are or what Christian denomination you are, so-called, because ultimately you can be saved in any one of them. Now, it's not stated like that explicitly, but the action of offering Mass in an Anglican cathedral suggests it, as does all the other ecumenical activity that we've seen since the 1960s, in which the Protestants are always treated as if they were already right with God and on the way to heaven. The problem is just that we're not united with them on earth. Ecumenical actions, not just words, but actions, are very significant because, quite simply, deeds speak louder than words. Just think of communion in the hand. No one had to tell Novus Ordos that Christ isn't truly present in the Holy Eucharist. They just introduced communion in the hand, and a large number of people lost the faith automatically. In any case, getting back to the article in the Catholic World Report, there it speaks of the nuncio celebrating the holy sacrifice of the Mass. Well, what really happened, of course, is that he simply presided over the new Mass, the Novus Ordo Missae, the Eucharistic celebration, as they like to call it, the Novus Ordo Supper Service, which is as invalid and as Protestant as the Anglican version of the Mass. And you know what? Viewed in that way, I guess it really doesn't matter now, does it? The nuncio might as well conduct the Novus Ordo worship in an Anglican church. What difference does it make at this point? And lastly, the official news site of the Society of St. Pius X, the Lefebvrists, has released an article about Leo XIV's endorsement of France's false ecumenism of blood doctrine, which basically holds that Catholics and Protestants and Orthodox are united in martyrdom, meaning basically that if someone dies for Christ, it doesn't matter if he's a Catholic or a Protestant or Orthodox. They're all equally saints and martyrs and worthy of veneration by Catholics. For those who are listening now who don't understand why that would be a problem, I'm putting a link to an old Novus Ordo Watch article on this explaining it all in the show notes. Now, in its article on that, the SSPX certainly criticizes the ecumenism of blood doctrine and explains why it's wrong. So far, so good. But there is one thing that is glaringly absent from their article. One word they avoid like the plague, and that word is heresy. Ecumenism of blood is heresy, a denial of the Roman Catholic faith. The Society of St. Pius X fails to call it by the only name that can be given to it because it directly contradicts the dogmatic and infallible teaching of the Council of Florence in the decree Cantate Domino found in Denzinger, number 714. Instead of blasting the false ecumenism of blood as manifestly heretical and condemned by the Church, the Lefebvrists merely note that it is, quote, unfortunately erroneous, unquote. My goodness, what in the world has happened to the SSPX? Not that their recognize and resist position was ever theologically sound, but there was a time, not too long ago, when they were outspoken and uncompromising. And now they can't even denounce clear heresy as heresy. It might offend the wrong people. It might jeopardize relations with the Vatican, or might cost them Leo's approval of the next batch of bishops they are in desperate need of consecrating. Remember what St. Paul wrote to the Galatians? In chapter 1, verse 8, he said, "But though we or an angel from heaven preach a gospel to you besides that which we have preached to you, let him be anathema." He didn't say he is unfortunately wrong. No, he said, let him be anathema. And so, he may be using beautiful vestments, he may be chanting in gorgeous Latin, and he may even have a contemplative gaze. But the fact remains that Leo XIV is anathema. TRADCAST Express is a production of Novus Ordo Watch. Check us out at tradcast.org, and if you like what we're doing, please consider making a tax-deductible contribution at novusordowatch.org/donate.